Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry, plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all kinds of creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Right, cue that cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination goes a long way to hopefully helping you take your mind off what's going on in the world right now. Strange and scary days indeed. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 121 with Jonathan Digby, an actor, musician, a screenwriter and author of the historical mystery novel A Murderous Affair. He's had a fascinating journey from acting to writing and back again, and he's learned a lot from working in different creative industries, so I think you'll definitely find this interview interesting. But before we get to that interview, let's address the huge elephant in the room, coronavirus. Depending on where you are in the world and when you get around to listening to this, probably will dictate how you feel about the whole thing, but it certainly does feel like we're living in a Michael Crichton novel right now. The main thing is to stay calm, be mindful of each other, and in case you didn't get the memo, wash your hands. Seriously though, I hope you and yours are well and that you're coping with what Mother Nature's throwing at us right now. Feel free to get in touch and let me know how you're doing, whether that means just moaning about what's going on in your family or sharing your concerns or whatever, it doesn't matter. Feel free to reach out. I think we all need somebody to talk to at the minute. Right, let's get back to writing. So, what about me? Well, you may as well chalk this intro up to one of those do as I say, not as I do things, because I've become guilty of what I've frequently accused writer friends of. So let me explain. One of those friends in particular has been writing his book for many, many, many years, but then, we all have to a certain extent. But this has been for a long time, before I even met him, I think, actually. So, except in my opinion, the book was actually finished, or at least in enough shape to be submitted to agents or publishers from the minute I first heard it at my critique group. The writing was tight and polished, and the critique group often struggled to find anything to critique. However, the writer in question could always find an excuse not to begin submitting. It was the beginning of the novel isn't as good as it could be, or I just want to go over it a couple more times, etc, etc. My own feeling, and I have told my friend this multiple times, is he's just scared of the possible rejection, and as a result he's become trigger shy and reluctant to release it out into the world. But maybe that's just because, as writers racked with self-doubt, we always think that our friends' books are superb and ours are terrible. Anyway, I get it. Totally. I've submitted my novel to a relatively low number of agents and publishers, around 15 as I record this, and I won't lie and say it doesn't sting every time I get a thanks but no thanks, or your writing's great but I'm not in love with your book as much as I need to be, or, the worst of all of them, just the deafening silence of a no reply. But that's why last spring I decided to live by my own words of wisdom and just get the damn thing out there. And in that time, to be honest, I've barely looked at the manuscript until last week, when I decided to rework the beginning of the book to make the first 3 chapters more powerful for submission, and something weird started to happen. I was genuinely seeing the novel with fresh eyes. I was just kind of less attached to it somehow. Now, I know this should be obvious because the standard advice is always finish the first draft, put it away for a bit. And I did do that for a few months, but I guess maybe it wasn't long enough, because I really do feel like I'm seeing it from a completely different angle now. Added to that, friend of the show Jim Snell has been reading the novel and has already provided some great early feedback that's given me even more perspective on the book. One thing that I hadn't thought about was that up until I sent it to Jim, all of my early readers have been British. And the book's very British. It's written in first-person POV by Mickey Blake, an ageing English safecracker. The story takes place in a rundown English seaside town. And it occurred to me that if I ever want the book to sell beyond these shores, it will need to connect in some way with a non-British audience. So to my relief, that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as I feared. Jim seems to like it, but based on some of Jim's early feedback, I am considering some fairly big changes to the structure of the book. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done, but I'm excited to give it a go, and I'm already thinking about the positive impact it could have on the sequel, which I've already written a big chunk of. So, thanks go to Jim Snell, and for letting me read some of his own excellent novel, Smoke, which is definitely going to find a home with an agent and a publisher in the not too distant future. It's a great premise and central character that you're going to love, and I'm sure we'll get Jim on to talk about it when that time comes. Anyway, all of that is a long way of saying I'm putting submissions on hold again until I've made some of these changes. I know, what a hypocrite. But hopefully you can understand my reasoning. I've actually invited an experienced novelist and non-fic author, Kate Harrison, onto the show, and in a few weeks you'll be able to hear her giving her professional feedback on the pitch that I've been sending out to publishers and agents. But what do you reckon? Am I just procrastinating again? Have you had similar experiences and concerns? Let me know and get in touch by tweeting me at JUPodcast or emailing wayne@waynekellyWrites.com, as I'd love to hear from you. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk to get free stuff and be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Okay, let's crack on with today's interview with Jonathan Digby. So Jonathan's an actor, musician, screenwriter and novelist who lives in Camden, London. He wrote the award-winning short film 9862 and the historical mystery novel A Murderous Affair, which is out right now from everywhere you can find good books. I chatted to Jonathan at his home in North London at the end of February before the dreaded coronavirus hit these shores. So I hope you enjoy the chat. Jonathan, thanks a million for taking the time to do this, and it's great. It's one of my rare in-person interviews because I do lots of these by Skype and whatever. So first of all, just explain whereabouts we are in the country and where we're recording this.
Well, we are in Camden Town, London. But firstly, to say thanks so much for having me on. It's a great pleasure and privilege to come and talk about writing and my book and things. We're in Camden. Sort of on the cusp of Primrose Hill, for those who know it, and I always say Camden, and then people come here and they go, "Oh, it's Primrose Hill." But if you say Primrose Hill, they're like, "No, this is Camden."
Yeah, I was going to say,
but it's the best of both worlds.
Draw the lines, it is, and it's very nice, and we're surrounded by books and music and art and all sorts of different things. So it's a good place to have a conversation. Yeah. So just to start us off, obviously it sounds very Hollywood because it was in Hollywood.
Yes.
But we did actually meet in LA recently on a short film festival. Well, it was a festival with lots of films, but both of us have got short films that we'd written and entered. So just to start us off, why don't we start there? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your short film 9862? Sure,
I'd love to. I'm sort of first and foremost really an actor, and it's quite a few years ago, actually. I was just working with an actress friend, developing kind of story ideas. She was quite a lot younger than me. And so I wanted to come up with a story that kind of suited us from a casting point of view. Wasn't kind of weird or anything. And so sort of came up with this idea of her being a sort of honey trap. And it's interesting because having seen Inkling recently, they start very similarly with a couple having a drink together who've just met that evening. So when I watched yours, I was like, I wonder where that's going to go. But that's basically the essence of the story, is that my character is in this strange girl's flat late at night. He's not sure he should be there. He's feeling a bit uncertain. You don't see the girl until then she suddenly appears, and she's this sort of blonde bombshell, young, early 20s, and it's like, okay. And then she starts taking photographs of him while seducing him, and he gets suspicious. And that's really the setup. It then becomes a fight between them. He's trying to delete the photos, she's trying to get her phone back. And it accelerates through ever greater degrees of chaos. And that was one of the driving ideas behind it, was to create a 10-minute film that was very chaotic and action-packed. So I'd seen a lot of shorts where not a lot happened. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do something completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, in the original script I wrote, they burnt the flat down.
And then you realise budget-wise that might be a bit difficult.
Yeah, it was. The director Giles, who then came on board was immediately like, right, well, that's got to go, this has got to go, and it got pared down. But it was great fun as a writer, just using your imagination, going for it. And I think that's really important always, to just don't worry about the budget when you're writing things. The money people can worry about that later.
Use that as your starting point. I agree, because I think you can box yourself in if you're not too careful.
Yeah.
And you can, as you say, and often I find that if you've got some kind of creative limitations, it often ends. You often come up with a different solution and a more inventive way of doing it, and sometimes it leads to a more interesting thing, a script or whatever. Anyway,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of the things, because I had made sort of films previously, but nothing at this scale, and as I say, getting Giles on as a director really brought home to me how collaborative the whole process is. Anyway, I mean, Giles, when he read the script, he saw more of the kind of horror angle, whereas I was kind of seeing more of the dark comedy angle, and so the end film is a mixture of those two, I think, quite well. But the original script was much more comic and farcical, so it's interesting how these things change. And at the time you think, well, it's not what I wrote, but actually what I've found with all artistic endeavour is that once it's out there and other people are watching it, it's not yours anymore. Their feedback is all that matters, and what they get out of it. And if people respond to it in a good way, then that's great.
Absolutely.
And you learn a lot of lessons on the way about how to approach it next time, and where you might stand your ground a bit more, or where you might think, no, actually, I didn't need to make a fuss about that. That's absolutely
let that go
fine. Yeah.
And how did you find it from a point of view? Obviously, you started off as you did some of the writing, which we'll come to. You started off writing non-fiction and novel as well. But from an acting point of view, because as you said, you're an actor first and foremost. So in terms of the script, you've read lots and lots of scripts in your time being an actor.
Yeah.
You're told to stand over there and do whatever, read the script and do it. But how did you approach writing the script? Did you need to teach yourself how to do that? Was it something where you just went for it?
It was something where I went for it. I think, trying to think back, because it's actually with me, I tend to have ideas a long time ago, but they always bubble away, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, the day will come and it'll just get written. And so I wrote it very quickly, but the idea had already been incubating for like 5 years or something. And I think originally, when I was working with this actress friend, I did start writing it on Word,
Yeah.
And then, of course, some people said, why are you doing that? There's all these great sort of softwares out there. And then you discover things like Final Draft, and Celtex is actually the one I use. And you start writing scripts in that, and you realise you can write any old rubbish, but it looks fantastic because it's all written,
It looks like a script straight away.
And so, but that really helps. That really helps. Just, little tricks like that, which most people probably knew about, but I hadn't done any script writing. And yes, I wrote it very quickly. I think there were a couple of awkward bits around. I think the awkward moment was, how does he discover what she's doing without it being unbelievable? Too contrived. So I always struggle with that a bit, and I think that was, even when Giles came on board, that bit needed to be worked through, but that we got there eventually. So I mean, I kind of self-taught, but I like to do everything that way, actually. As more will reveal itself later on, I think.
So where would you say the driving force to actually write a script in the first place? Not necessarily that one, but was it from the point of view with the acting in mind?
Totally,
yeah.
So I really believe, acting is a tough profession. Don't want to make too big a deal of that, but I do think that I think it is very important for actors to try and create their own work. I think it's the only way, actually. And it's much more interesting, I found, because with 9862, I was there right at the beginning. I'm still involved with it now, about to go to another festival in Los Angeles to see it, and it's much more satisfying in a way. I recently did quite a big TV series. I was only in one episode. I was in for three or 4 days, and you kind of get driven to set. controlled the whole way. You do your bit. You're
feel
taken home.
Part of it, maybe.
I mean, obviously, if you have a bigger role, you get more involved. But it can be a little bit. You can feel a bit sort of not part of the whole creative process in a way. I mean, acting is an odd profession. But now I've written another short which I've written a role for myself in, but it's not really about that character so much. It's more about the story that I want to get out, and I've written a feature which is very much for me as an actor. Mm-hmm. But as we'll come on to my book later, I've written a pilot for that, and I haven't written a role for myself in that at all. So, it's kind of...
Yeah. Do you think at one point perhaps one will overtake the other in terms? I guess it depends on which one goes. But do you think it'll be a point of it will be more? You'll be writing it for the sake of writing it, and you've got that story out, and that you want to do it rather than thinking because where you started out, as you say, was very much almost kind of practically minded, thinking, well, yeah, I'm going to write myself apart, and I'm going to have this thing, which is I think I could totally agree. I think it's a great way to think about it.
It was a showcase. It was to write a showcase. That then I could show to people and say, this is how I come across. This is what you get when you employ me as an actor, or one side of it. To answer that question about what will become, what will take over, I work on the principle of having lots of different streams going on at the same time. So I will go with whatever works at the time, I think. So if, for example, my book gets made into a TV series, then that will take over, I'm quite sure. But if, on the other hand,
it doesn't,
something else, acting wise comes along, then that will be the focus. I suspect it'll be something in between, and I'll be making my own stuff and trying to get better at that. And sort of, the way I see it in my mind, sort of edging pieces along a board, one, bit by bit here, bit there. Yeah. And
obviously the other thing with it is the variety of it. It's not, you don't have 2 days the same, so it's kind of interesting from that point of view, I should imagine.
It is interesting. I do sometimes forget what I'm supposed to be doing. Going back to Los Angeles next week, and I've promised somebody another draft of my pilot episode, which I've written for the book, which we'll talk about. But at the same time, I've got to go there with my acting hat on, and I need a new show reel and photos and all this kind of stuff. So there's always juggling the different bits and pieces that need to be done. Yeah.
So what came first? Was it acting or writing?
Acting. Yeah. Most certainly. I'll give you a quick potted history.
Yeah, go for it.
So I went to drama school. After school, I went to the Oxford School of Drama. Very good school, not in Oxford actually, but sort of north of Oxford. And came out of there, 21 years old, moved to London to be an actor, but I really wasn't very focused at the time. In fact, I was all over the place. So I did a few fringy things, but I'm actually a musician as well, and I got into a band sort of around early 90s. Actually, I had my own band, then I got into another band, and so most of the 90s was music. That's why I'm in Camden, really.
Yeah, it's a good place to be.
Yeah. And then when so the acting kind of took a back step. Then at the end of the 90s, which was also the end of my 20s, I went back to university and did an archaeology degree.
As you do. It sounds obvious. You were into music and you thought, let's go and do an archaeology.
Yeah, I was in a band with these really intelligent guys who had all been to university, and I was always aware of not having any sort of academic qualifications, having gone for drama school when I left school. So I kind of wanted to deal with that, and I went to university down the road, UCL, did 3 years, undergraduate, then a year master's. So I was really actually going to be an archaeologist. But I did a few plays when I was back at uni and kind of got the bug again. And then when with archaeology, it's very similar to acting. There's a hell of a lot of work out there if you are prepared to work for nothing.
Yeah, you've literally got to dig for it.
Yeah, and you can go and digs all over the world, but you might get fed. And so acting's the same. You go back into it, and there's lots of fringe plays and short films to do for free and all that kind of stuff. So Yeah, I'm being slightly facetious, but I never really had the love for the archaeology that I had for acting, so I started again. But I also, I think, coming out of the archaeology was the writing, the desire to write history stuff came from that. And so, as we'll see with my novel, it was kind of a coming together of the archaeological, historical background, the acting, especially Shakespearean period, and then a love of crime. All these things coming together.
Well, why don't you tell us about that? Tell us about your novel.
Sure. So it's called A Murderous Affair, and it's an Elizabethan murder mystery or crime novel. Obviously very important in this world to get your genres, right. For a bit like the film festivals we go to, you can win awards in all kinds of different categories, and
especially with Amazon now. Make sure
exactly.
You hit the right pigeonholes.
So it's history and it's crime, and it's set in 1588, just after it's the year of the Spanish Armada, and it's some months after that victory. And my character is called John Lovett. He's kind of the illegitimate son of an old peer of the realm. He's got a legitimate brother who's about 10 years older than him, who he works for. He's like his sort of dog's body. He's not treated very well. And this body of this Portuguese merchant kind of gets fished out of the Thames, and the brother knew the merchant and tries to get Lovett to investigate, really as a cover-up, to sort of, brush it under the carpet because there's some other things he's trying to hide. But at the same time, Sir Francis Walsingham gets involved, and this is one of the elements of the book, is that there's sort of real historical characters and fictional characters coming together. And Walsingham wants the truth, and it's quite a powerful attraction for Lovett because he's kind of offering him a way out of his menial tasks, but also in quite a dangerous way. And Walsingham was an interesting character, and he ran this network of hundreds of spies all over Europe at the time. And so Lovett's getting drawn into that world. He's also trying to help his brother without much thanks. But it mixes in a whole load of other stuff. I mean, there's a scene where he ends up on the stage in London.
So you're throwing in your acting.
There's a girl who is the sister of his best friend, and the best friend disappears early on in the book, and so he then becomes responsible for her, and he likes her romantically as well, but he now has a responsibility for her. So and that sort of interplay between them goes through and will continue to. So it's a bit of it's a very, very big mix of crime, history, bit of comedy. So there's a lot of themes in there.
So what made you think? Obviously, you go from. So did you do any writing, or were you interested in writing at all? Like when you were growing up, was it something? Were you into English, or?
I was very much into English. In fact, the only A level I did any good in was English. A level. I had to retake them when I went to UCL at the end of the 90s. I was very much into reading. At around the time, sort of the A-level time, I got very much into the sort of classic English writers of Dickens, Hardy, Austen, and so on. And but I think in some ways my reading has degenerated slightly over the years because I got very into crime, and I'm sure you've come across other people like this. That as a genre, it just sort of captures you. Now I will go to the crime section in most bookshops, and
and I think the fact, obviously, even in the language that you use there, you're almost talking about it as if it's like some kind of guilty pleasure or something, which I think is interesting because most people still do that, and yet some of the best writing that's going on at the moment is in that genre, one way or another, whether it's historical crime or whether it's contemporary crime.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to knock it in that sense.
But I think a lot of people do. I think if people say, you talk about the classics or whatever, but I think people sort of say, well, it's almost like apologetic. It's like, well, I like that genre or whatever.
Yeah, true, and I did that. But I guess I don't read big 1,000-page,
Yeah.
you know,
Neither do I,
19th century novels
Yeah,
anymore. It's
yeah.
really what I was trying to say.
Maybe that's as much
Yeah.
about modern life as anything else in terms of being able to absorb yourself
Yeah.
in something for that period of time now.
Yeah, no, I think that's true.
So when you started writing A Murderous Affair, did you just open up Word and just start typing away? Did
Yeah.
you? It wasn't a case you thought, "Oh, I'm fancy like writing like a novel. Do I need to?" Did you have any desire to kind of, not find out how it's done, but did you kind of hoover up any of that stuff before you started?
I didn't. I mean, I had started a couple. I think that the most important advice I would give to anyone starting is to pick something you want to write. And I had definitely tried a couple of other things before that. A couple of short story ideas. I had another idea for a novel, which I wrote a chapter kind of guide to, but I never actually started it. But at the time, I was doing archaeology, but I was also reading quite a lot of Lindsay Davis. I didn't even come across the Falco novel. So he's like a Roman detective, and they're kind of in the historical crime genre.
Yeah.
There's a lot of authors, but there's only maybe you could probably count on one hand the really successful ones.
Yeah.
C.J. Sampson is another,
Mm-hmm.
and I think reading Lindsay Davis kind of gave me the idea that, hang on, maybe I could do a historical character, and actually maybe that would be something I would really enjoy doing, because I could,
especially off the back of the degree and everything that you'd done.
I can bring all the research into it, because I really enjoy doing that, and I don't have to quote who I'm, all that stuff. So that, it gave a freedom to research, but not actually in an academic
List all
way.
your sources, and put your bibliography at the back.
Yeah, although people have asked me actually to do that.
Yeah, I think probably people that are heavily into that genre, it's kind of, I suppose it's quite important. So what was your road to publication with A Murderous Affair? So at what point did you redraft it lots and lots of times and then send it to somebody, or did you speak to somebody? How did that happen?
So what happened, it took about 6 years, because I was doing lots of other things at the same time, and I will never forget writing the word to the end, and that was one of the most satisfying things I'd ever done in my life. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of proverbially went in a drawer. Obviously, it was sitting on my laptop, but I didn't do anything. I kind of thought, in some ways, that was the achievement at that point. Yeah. And I think for maybe 6 months or so, I just sort of basked in that achievement of having finished. That's great.
It's a great achievement.
130,000 word novel, and I kind of was probably a bit afraid to test it in the market, to be honest. I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's all very well, the whole same with filmmaking, music, writing, creating is great fun, but then the business side comes in, and then it's a different ball game altogether. Yeah. But what happened? So I mentioned to you earlier before we started that I was in a writers group, and one of the guys from my writers group was having a drink somewhere, and this guy came in who knew a friend of his, and he had a publishing company called Endeavour, who just published online books, and this guy was saying, I want crime and I want history. And my friend was like, hang on a sec, I know someone who's written a historical crime.
He called you and said, Jonathan, do you know anybody that's...
Exactly. It could have gone just like that. Hang on a minute. But so I sent it to this guy, and they said straight away, we want to publish it. Could you give it a good edit, I think was or can you lose 10,000 words? Or it was something not particularly helpful, but sort of stirred me into doing it. And then I went for it for maybe a month, and then it got a lot better. Because actually, I think going back a little bit, what happened was I wrote the first maybe 12 chapters at the beginning of that 6-year period, and then it kind of went for maybe a year where nothing really happened. Then the writers group started, and then it started getting some momentum. But when I finished it, I had to go back and rewrite those first chapters, because my writing style had changed so much. And actually, as you were asking about
Yeah.
the process, I actually learned how to do it.
Yeah,
on
I think
the
a
job.
lot of people do
Yeah.
that particularly with their first
Yeah.
novel. You learn to write the novel.
Yeah, and then I got into the flow, and I kind of, because I don't really like to plan ahead too much. I'm the kind of writer that likes to keep myself guessing about who. So I hadn't decided who'd committed the murder.
Sure.
And I'd kept all these potentials alive,
Mm-hmm.
and it was only towards the end where I went, I know who it has
Yeah.
to be, this guy,
Kind of
and
worked
that's
it
the
out,
twist.
yeah.
But in terms of style, I had to go back and write those first 6. So they just weren't very good. They were
Sure.
clunky. There was too much history.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the ability then, and I'm still, working on
hard.
it now.
It's a balance,
but
yeah.
have that light touch with history.
Yeah.
It's so important with history writing. It's not to kind of shove it down the reader's throat,
Because
but to
you're
kind of,
interested in
yeah.
it, and there's a particular element. Yeah.
yeah. So when I got the opportunity, I think I probably had done a bit of that rewriting, but not really satisfactorily. And then when the guy from Endeavour, gave me the sort of green light
Yeah.
to go for it, then I really went for it, and now I feel that they are in the same style as the rest of the book.
Yeah,
That's all I
yeah,
can,
yeah, they're consistent,
without
yeah.
saying
Yeah.
too much about them. But because I was listening to one of your other interviews with Will Dean, he said he'd written a book that is in a drawer and will
Yeah.
never come. So I don't have that. I don't have. But this was my book that was in a drawer.
It was for a period of time.
and it
yeah.
needed. Luckily, there was enough to make it work. But it just needed some rejigging at the beginning. So that was the process, and then I sent it to Endeavour, and they published it. I mean, it happened within a month.
Yeah.
It was not. I mean, from when I sent
Sure,
it.
yeah.
And we had a few arguments about what it should be called. They won. We had a few arguments about the cover. They are. I don't know if you've come across them. They're impressive. They publish a lot of books.
But they've got a clear idea of what they want to do and how
Yeah.
they're going to do it.
And because the original title for my book was Body at Cuckold's Point.
Right.
Cuckold's Point was an actual place. That's where the
Right.
body's washed up, and it's this monument to cuckoldry, which meant from all the research
Yeah.
I'd done, this is important. They
yeah.
were like, no, it's not commercial enough. A Murderous Affair. But I managed to get them to have Body at Cuckold's Point as a kind of subtitle, a bit
Oh, right.
Shakespearean,
That's
like
good,
2
yeah.
titles.
Yeah.
I'm sure no one else gets that apart from me, but I felt like a small
They
victory.
thought it's
Yeah.
important to you,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Let them have his subtitle.
But then the really terrifying bit happens, which is
People
they
read it.
publish it and people read it,
Yeah.
and suddenly you get all this feedback, and I wasn't prepared for it at all.
Mhm.
I really wasn't. And I don't know if it's because obviously it's an ebook, so I don't know whether it's different if you have a hard copy as well. I should imagine it's not very different, because you'll obviously have an ebook version
Sure.
as well. But people pile in with their opinion,
Sure,
and it's
yeah.
like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And it was fabulous.
You have to take the rough with the smooth,
it was
yeah.
like going to sea in very rough, stormy seas and just clinging on to the side of
Well,
the
you
boat for a
can
bit,
go,
thinking,
am
am I going to survive this?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go on to... I've talked to other authors about this, but obviously you can go onto Amazon, you can look up, stone cold classic, literary classics, and there will be X percentage of 1-star reviews,
Yeah.
and this is terrible, and everything else. So, but it's easy to say that when it's not your book.
I think, the first time I got a sort of, I don't think it was even 1 star, probably 2 stars, but that hurt enough. But somebody said, yeah, but that's great, John, because it proves that it's not just your family reading it,
Exactly,
and you're actually
yeah.
getting some realistic views. I mean, now I've had over 300 reviews or something, I think, across all the different Amazon platforms, and I don't tend to read them, but I do look at the sort of percentage, and it's around the 4 to 4.5 out of 5 mark, and as long as it stays there, I'm happy.
Then it's okay.
So that means most people are enjoying it. The other thing that I found, and I think this was probably the most wonderful thing about it, was that some people responded to it in such a positive way, and you get this. I say I don't read reviews, but I did at the beginning, and you have, someone would say, I love this book; it's the best book I ever read, and you obviously think, well, that is such a fantastic thing to have given that joy to that person in that moment. I'm sure it's not the best book they ever read, but for them to feel that in that moment,
and you've touched something, you've reached
and
something.
that, in some ways, I would honestly say that makes it worth it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But also the other thing that happened was I hadn't realised, because I thought I was writing a crime novel, and I hadn't quite really understood how important history was to people. Luckily, I think I got away with it, but with the next book I'm writing, the sequel, I'm much more concerned now with accuracy and create, but also not just the accuracy, because I think you can argue about that actually, but creating that world in even more detail, but in a way
making it as vivid but interesting,
because people really respond to that, and that was a nice thing to kind of realise. So overall, it's been a very positive experience. I you might ask, would I have done it differently? Should I have gone for a mainstream publisher first? And the answer is I don't know, but I think I wouldn't. If somebody asked me, and people do ask me all the time, would you go with an online publisher? And I would tend to say go for it, because if you're confident you can write more books, if you're confident that you can survive, if it doesn't do very well or whatever, it's great to have it out there. I'd rather it was out there than sitting on my laptop. But it's a different thing, because they don't really market the book. You have to do a lot of that work yourself with Twitter and all that kind of thing. So,
and how have you found that side of things?
I think before my book was published, I was kind of I'll never be on Twitter, or hate all that stuff. Now I'm sort of Twitter maniac, really. I mean, I've calmed down a bit, but the first couple of years I was really going for it. And there's another thing you realise is there's a great community of writers on Twitter and other social media who are all supporting each other, really. And I mean, I've got 20,000 plus followers, and I'd say probably about 3/4 of them are writers. There's a lot of us out there. And of course, it's a slightly crazy ratio, but that and I think so that was a good thing as well, to kind of to be pulled into that.
And I suppose because the way that it kind of happened, such an organic way, and it was you almost weren't putting it out there at that point, and it ended up doing that. You haven't really got anything else to compare it to anyway. It's not like you tried for a period of time to get it, in inverted commas, traditionally published, or you tried to do it any other way. So that's the way that it happened, and it's worked out okay for you. And as you say, your book's out in the world, so it's fine. Yeah,
I think financially, it's a numbers game. If I had 10 books, then it would be so much the better. But it did okay the first couple of years. I was pleasantly surprised, actually. I mean, that's the other thing, you don't really write to make money. Well, I mean, I think most people don't think about that to begin with. But then once it's out there and you look at some of the percentages and all that kind of stuff, it's like, oh my God, hang on a second. Why didn't I become an accountant? Why am I doing this? It's good not to know about that stuff in a way. I think it would just put you off. But actually, the terms you get with an online book are probably better than through a publisher. I don't know if that's still the case, because the different prices of books and that kind of thing. But there is, there's a whole.
Do you have options? Or do they have the option to do order print on demand or anything like that with them, or is it will always just be an ebook?
No, that I have that option. I've never taken it up, actually. So I'd say on the negative side, the one thing I would say is that the edit is not as thorough as you would get with a traditional publisher. And I think there's two sides to that. One is I think they could have done a better job, but the other side is that you as a writer are much more responsible for that kind of thing. Going through that publishing route. And I mean I'm not the best editor in the world, and also some of it's written in Elizabethan English, so people get a bit confused about spellings, but I wish now that it had another run through of that, and that's why I've not gone for a hard copy at all, because I want to I would in my ideal world, there'll be another opportunity to do that with a more thorough edit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Would you consider, because it seems that it's, in a way, would you ever consider going down the self-published route with a view to the fact that, because you've done the work in terms of social media now, you've built a bit of a social media presence, you've already got one book out there. If you're writing a sequel, I mean, I don't know what your terms are as regards that, as whether they have to have the sequel or whatever it is.
No, not at all.
But you have done a lot of the legwork already. Obviously, there's investment from the point of view. You'd need to sort out your cover art and all the other different bits and pieces, and you might need to get somebody to edit it, which again you're going to have to pay for, which can be a big thing. But with that in mind, is that something that you would consider?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. It's the logical thing to do, because as you say, now you have that. If you have the marketing platform in place, that's really the big thing, because it takes time to grow. The artwork, I'd love to control that in a way. Yeah. I mean, I like what Endeavour did, but I'd like to build on that, and then not have to compete with them on other ideas. The edit, I mean, I've already lined that up actually. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think it is definitely the logical way to go, just purely on the Amazon terms and things.
I think when you start, I'm looking to different things that I keep to-ing and fro-ing with it for a while. I think I even wrote a blog post about it and said, no, that's it. Next year, this book that I'm just finishing editing now, I'm gonna self-publish. And then in the intervening 6 months or whatever, I completely changed my mind. I thought, well, actually, I'll try publishing first, and I'll start sending it out to agents or whatever. And that's kind of where I am now in that hellish process of doing that. But one of the things that always put me off is like, it's the thought of starting from scratch at the beginning. It's when you haven't got anything out there, you haven't got a book out there, you haven't got a huge social media platform. I mean, I've got a platform, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's it's not a level where I need to be, where I'd be able to sell lots and lots of books. I don't think I need to do lots and lots of investment financially and in time as well to be able to do it. But I often think with authors that have been out for a period of time, or they've done it kind of like you have, I often think, well, you've got a foothold at least. You're probably in a slightly better position to do it. People already know what you're about. You've already got the first book out there. You'll have a certain amount of fans that have read it and are waiting for the next book. So you've got,
hopefully. It's been a while, so I would forgive them if they're no longer
waiting. They'll be really desperate for it by now, Jonathan. But I do. That's something that I wonder about. I do think there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd probably recommend trying to get it published traditionally, because why not? I mean, that's. I don't even have an agent. Sure. I do as an actor. Sure, yeah. But I don't as a writer. And a lot of the things I'm trying to do, I'm sort of being told all the time, you can't do it that way. But to go back, I think with Twitter, for example, which is a great platform for getting a message out about you, but maybe it doesn't mean people buy it, but they will definitely see it. You don't have to have many followers to do that. It's more about connecting to people who have a lot of followers and getting them to retweet it, and there's all sort of strategies around that that you can do. And maybe you just need some artwork to say coming in in November or whatever, and actually that would probably help focus you. So I think, I've learnt all this on the bit by bit, but there are all sorts of techniques. I think some writers just don't want to do that, and I respect that as well, because they want to write. And but if it becomes a business, then you don't have time to write. You can't do them at the same time, really. But I'm quite keen to do stuff myself. I think slightly
maybe on the back of
pig-headed in that sense, but
and maybe on the back of again, kind of circling back to the film, the fact that you've just written and starred in the short film, you had quite a lot of creative control with that. I suppose you kind of had a taste of what you can do if you've got more of a say in the creative process, the other side of it.
Well, one of the key things with the book is to try and get it made into a TV series, and I think that is where my energies have been focused for quite a while now. because it just lends itself to a great TV show. I think, you know, sometimes when you feel something, or you know, and I really, you know, I really believe in it and its possibilities. And if that, you know, and I am having some conversations around that, if that were to get the green light, then selling books would be a lot easier. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing feeds into the other, and you wouldn't care about it. Yeah. You just put it out.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, I quite like the idea as well of, you know, having a quiet life where I just write books and put them out on the internet and you know, make a little bit of money that way. I mean, there's so many ways you can go.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree. I think I'm similar to the extent that I think in my idealistic version of it would be where you don't have to hustle, but I think the reality is you always have to hustle one way or another, whether it's writing a book or a script or you're acting or you do music or whatever it is. It just seems to be there's always going to be some kind of element of you need to try to make things happen somehow, whether that unfortunately that means going out into the world and meeting people and chatting to people and stuff.
One of the things I wanted to say earlier, actually, which I think is quite important, and why I would possibly recommend going for the ebook or self-publishing route. When I wrote A Murderous Affair, I pretty much, as we discussed, started from scratch, didn't really know what I was doing. Yeah. I had read Lindsay Davis and other examples of the genre. I'd read a lot of crime, including some authors like, you know, Michael Dibdin, who I think is absolutely fantastic, and so I had an idea about what I was doing, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't actually manage to, because they're formulaic, these books. Not all of them. I mean, Dibdin, there's a formula in there, but it's
well hidden,
around all the great writing. So I definitely tried to follow a formula, and I failed, I think. And so I ended up with something which is slightly different to the genre, which would probably have meant that a traditional publisher would have rejected it, because it didn't quite fit the mold. And so, but what I found is that people respond to it because it's different, and that is, you know, and so I think that's a good thing.
I think it is, but like all of those things, I think it's the same with music or anything else. I definitely agree, but in the beginning it's harder to break through with that thing that's like that, you know, and you can get that with it across TV, film, books, whatever it is. I mean, I've got a similar thing. My novel is crime, but it's completely different genre. It's contemporary crime. It's written in the first person, and on the face of it you could go, oh, it's kind of like a caper novel in terms of the setup of it, but it ends up going somewhere kind of probably a little bit more emotional and a bit more, and so the consequence, it kind of falls between two stools often when you talk to people. It's like, well, no, we don't really have just a straight ahead kind of caper kind of novel. Well, it's not really, because it goes somewhere else a bit later on, and it's kind of, this guy's having like, essentially he's having like an emotional breakdown almost in the main person in the story. And then you talk to somebody else that does do the caper novel, and they're like, oh no, we don't like all that emotional bullshit. So it's like, you know, it's kind of, it's like finding the two things. And I mean, I've already had like a couple of bits, I've had like compliments about the writing, but then have you thought about introducing this character or it not being in first person POV? And it's like, yeah, but then it's a completely different book. You know, I'll have to start it again completely from scratch, and that's not really the book I wanted to write. So
This is a problem, I think, which you've just touched on, which occurred to me earlier, which is why creative control, I think, is key, because you want to get your vision out there, essentially, at the end of the day. And like I mentioned with the short, having a director, I wrote it, produced it, and I'm in it, but I didn't direct it. And the director's the most important component in a film, really, as you know. So, which is, I mean, Giles did a great job, and I'm really proud of the film. But I was aware that we had different visions, and so the longer you can kind of hold on to your vision, and because at the end of the, I keep saying the end of the day, cliche, but what happens is you have to take ownership of what's. So when I go and see 9862 in a festival in Hollywood, and with all that great stuff around that, when the film's up there, I have to take responsibility for it. And there are bits in there I still go, oh god, I don't like that. Why didn't I put that little shot in? Oh god, if I had more time we could have done that. So you're always aware, and so the more that
expose
the
yourself.
more that you're in control of that and also able to take responsibility for it, the better, I think. Yeah. So I'd stick to your guns. That's my advice, because there'll definitely be a readership for what you're doing, and if it's different, they'll respond even better and even more to it, I think.
That's great advice. So as we sort of wrap things up, so why don't you just give us a sense of like what you're doing now? You kind of touched on it. You mentioned you started the sequel, or you're part way.
Yeah, no, that's 3/4 of the way through, and I know exactly what's happening. With that, the characters have all moved to France. He's on a spying mission for Walsingham. He's now sort of fully in the net, and it's based around the true story of the English ambassador to Paris, who was guilty of spying for. It's well-known document. He was guilty of spying for the Spanish. He had, I think, he had gambling debts, and so they got him.
He was vulnerable.
But so Lovett's kind of up against this guy. But there's a murder around that. There's always like subplots and subplots.
Yeah, sure,
as I mentioned earlier, I've introduced a dog now based on my dog.
At this precise moment in time. Yeah.
So I have to remember him.
I have to say,
he is being good now. He wasn't earlier. And so, there's a lot of different elements to the plot. So there's that. I've written a pilot for the first book, which I'm talking to people about in Los Angeles. Very early days, but they like the idea. But I'm learning. See, I'm learning how that works. Yeah. And I, went in totally wide-eyed and naive and met a few people, and then you hear words like showrunner attached. Like, okay, so that But I think it's the best way to do things, honestly. Because if I read a book about how to become get your TV idea published, I wouldn't do it.
No, I was going to say. I think sometimes it's kind of like the arrogance of youth type thing. It's that naivety sometimes. Yeah. It kind of gets you further than looking for the next trapdoor or where it's. I think, and I particularly find this about America in general, is they do seem more open to you saying, I haven't done that before, I don't know how that works, tell me how it works. Whereas I think sometimes when you hear, I don't know whether it's a class thing or I don't know what it is, but sometimes you do feel a bit stupid, if you say, I don't really know how that works, or I'm not sure about that.
I think in our industry, or industries, particularly the film side though, you have to remember that in Britain it's a cottage industry.
Completely,
we make incredibly good stuff, but it's a small industry. In Los Angeles, I think you were mentioning this earlier, that's what they do there. Yeah. That's their biggest industry. And so there's much more openness and willingness to kind of talk ideas. Half the time it doesn't go anywhere, or maybe more than half. I think here, because it's successful the way it's worked, it's much more of a closed shop. It's harder to kind of break into in some ways, and people are quite protective of their ideas. And it's somebody said to me once, the difference is in America they say, what can you do? Over here they say, what have you done? So it's all about the CV. And I found that with the film festivals. I found it really hard to get into UK film festivals, and I think it's because there's a lot of very good quality short films that it's up against here. And whereas in the US, it's up against a lot of very good quality short films, but there are many more festivals, and so more opportunity for. And
I think you've got the added element of being slightly exotic when you go there.
That's true. Yeah,
because you're British. Yeah, which helps, I think.
Absolutely.
When you go there, you suddenly find yourself becoming more posh.
Yes, I sort of lay it on, but this is a mistake I'm making, because actually I should be creating an American persona so I can act there and work as an actor there. So
it's two ways of looking.
But you fall back on the
I think it's subconscious. I noticed when I was out there, you do suddenly find yourself, oh hello, yes, I'd like you to pass me that. And I don't even know I'm doing it, but I think
I do that.
They do openly mock you as well sometimes with your accent, which makes me laugh.
Yeah,
because you couldn't get away with that here.
No, they do like Brits, even if it's more as some sort of exotic creature to sort of remark upon. So it is good. It is good, yeah. So there's that. I've been going to LA a lot. I'm trying to get my O1 visa at the moment to work there as an actor. Which was with the short film. That was one of the ideas behind doing it originally. And it's taken 3 years, but we're getting there. Slowly getting the traction that it might actually happen. I've written another short, and because 9862's had a certain amount of success, I've kind of thought, I'd like to do it again and do another one. So I've written this short film about this Austrian count who knew Mozart and was sort of contemporary with him and lent him money. He also was Beethoven's patron. So but I have got the bug from the short film festivals a bit, because even though it took a while, it's been a lot of fun. And when we met, that was good fun doing that. And I've written a feature film as well, which is a bit like 9862. It's a dark comedy, and it's a vehicle for me as an actor.
Brilliant. So
low budget.
You have to go low with the feature.
Yeah.
So loads and loads of things going on. So just as we finish then, if you had one piece of advice that maybe you've been given along the way, some creative piece of advice, or anything that kind of sticks out from, it could be from acting, it could be from writing or whatever, that kind of stuck with you, or that you kind of, you still holds true nowadays, what do you think it would be?
Gosh, that's such a difficult question. In some ways I think probably from my point of view covered a lot of that already. I remember I saw this interview with Carole King. Mm-hmm. I think it was a documentary about her. And she said, I think maybe it was on Jules Holland, and he asked her, what advice would you give? And she said, keep knocking at the door. Yeah. Because one day that door will open, and if you stop knocking, you won't be standing there. And I thought that was great. Yeah. So never give up.
It's the perseverance.
Don't let anyone tell you shouldn't be doing it, or because you only get better by doing it. Mm-hmm. When I started my novel, I mentioned the first 12 chapters. It wasn't very good.
Sure.
And another great bit of advice was I'm going to forget his name now, but the guy who wrote the Inspector Morse novels.
Yeah, Colin Dexter.
Who I admire him greatly, because he then sort of sold the TV, but then someone else was writing the TV series, and then he kept control and wrote the end. Yeah. And he's in every episode as well, isn't he? He sort of pops up.
Oh, right.
But I remember an interview with him, and he said, I write a first draft, and it's not very good, and then I say to myself, now I'm going to go back and make this better. All writing is rewriting,
definitely,
which you've probably heard. Don't get it right, get it right. You only get better by doing something over and over again. And actually, the last thing I would say on that is, because I mentioned I did music, and I was a very talented musician in my sort of teenage years and 20s. I still write a bit now. It came too easily in a way. Mm-hmm. I could sit down at the piano, bash out a tune. Some of it was terrible, but I could write some quite decent stuff, and it didn't seem like work. The novel was really hard work, and was far more satisfying for that.
For that reason.
Yeah, for that reason.
Because you had to work at it.
So I had to learn the hard way that actually putting some work into things is really rewarding. And now I work much harder as an actor. Mm-hmm. I mentioned in my 20s I was not focused at all. Now I'm much more focused, and I work at it, and it's enjoyable, even if you're not having huge success all the time.
Sure. Well, that's a great place to finish. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Been brilliant. Cheers, John. Thanks.
Okay, thanks again to Jonathan, and you should definitely check out his work, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts to have the podcast downloaded automatically every week. Also remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, or if you just want to give a shout out and have a bit of a moan or whatever, that's fine, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. I've got some great content coming up, and I'll do my best to keep putting stuff out so we can keep each other company through the uncertain times ahead. Next up will be a chat with master of the twisty thriller Steve Kavanagh, which was a great chat. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Keep writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Joined up